Thank you so much for joining me, Mary. It's so good to talk to you. It's been so
I
long, it feels.
It's been entirely too long, and I'm so excited to catch up with you. It has been too long. Um, yeah, we should meet more often.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I was just saying, I realized that this summer it will have been 7 years since I first came into your office back in Eugene.
That is actually wild, and it has been, gosh, in those 7 years, we've both really gone in such different directions than I don't know, than I could have expected. I'm sure for you as well, and it's been really amazing to watch you. Uh, People, it's so funny. It's not uncommon for someone to come into my office now, or for me to meet someone casually, and them to be like, oh, I've been listening to this woman named Jen Donovan and da 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 da. And I'm like, yeah, I know Jen. I know Jen very well. She's awesome. I'm glad you're listening to her. Yes, yeah. So it's been so fun to see you really help educate the world through your online content and all your programs. It's been incredible. And it's such a value add to those going through illness and really to the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, you were one of those pivotal people for me in terms of like, 2017 was like that was my dark night of the soul year, like for sure,
Yeah.
right? And when you're in the trenches, like your life can go so many different directions. And so you were one of those like pivotal people during that year who kind of like pushed me onto the path that like now I've been on for the last 7 years. Like I was so um like this whole world of natural health and ancestral health was so unknown to me still at that time, like I remember lamb was one of the only things that I could tolerate. And I remember asking you like, I'm eating red meat every day. Like, is that okay?
Yes. Yeah, well, I was just so glad because I'll never forget when you came in, and and I could just tell that you hadn't been heard in a medical sense, uh, and so when that happens, we end up inside and we end up not sharing with practitioners what we're really going through because we haven't been heard. And and I could just see even from the MCAS splotches, on your skin, at least some of what was going on. So I was so grateful to be there for you because you had such wonderful work ethic and such a wonderful approach to everything, for all the practitioners' work that you brought in. Uh, and I really think a lot of your background and your personality too, like all of the work you had done in therapy as a therapist, but also your personality coming into it was exactly right to get out of your
Yeah.
situation. Like, and you really, I mean, it took you a long time. It took me a long time. I think for a lot of people who see people who have gone into remission, there's often an assumption that, oh, either you were never sick or you didn't have this or this or that. And
Yeah.
y'all, let me just tell you, she was digging herself out of the grave for years, years. It was brutal. It looks beautiful on this end, and it is beautiful in a really beautiful, in a mythological transubstantiation way. Absolutely. It's beautiful in a way often I'm still learning about. Like sometimes we're still surprised by the ways that it positively influences us, but it is brutal and long when you're in it. And so it was really, I fell in love with your character, seeing you go through that. I really admired your approach and the way you did it. And I'm just so grateful that now you've turned that into food for others.
Yes. Yes. And yeah, that was something that was so important to me and like let me know that I was on the right path in choosing you to work with. And I remember just like bawling in our first session
Yeah.
because I was telling you all the symptoms that I was having. And you immediately just went to like, well, here's how we're going to reverse it. And I remember I started bawling. So I was like, you think I can recover? Like I was shocked because every doctor or allergist or things I had seen before was pretty much just like, here's the medications, like just figure out what you react to least when you eat and like live this
Yes.
little tiny life. And for you to just like without question, just immediately be like, yeah, like you're gonna recover. Like you didn't hesitate at all. And that
Yeah.
was so meaningful to me. And then, like you said, I really did feel like digging myself out of the grave. Like my detox was so brutal. And but part of the reason I stuck with it, even, like still feeling worse, like 6 months in so many ways, like because you had been so confident in the beginning, I was like just unwavering, like, nope, just gonna keep going, just gonna keep going. And that's sometimes what
Yeah.
it takes.
Yeah, and I honestly, I didn't even think of that at the time. When you cried in the session, I was just so grateful I was so grateful to be with someone where we understood each other, you know? And my confidence came not out of naivety or flippancy. It really came out of, well, I always see it get better. So like I hadn't even thought about it, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So I know in the online sphere, I often have to be much more careful about my words and things like that because people can get really upset about talking about if something is reversible or not, and also legally and all of that. But the reality was that was very much my experience. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, and I think for those of us who have reached the other side, it is so dark and isolating and lonely when you're in illness that the only one that can actually give you a light is someone who's actually been through it, because otherwise it's not. I don't know about you. I just got to a point in my illness where if someone hadn't done what I was trying to do, I just didn't listen anymore. Like I was just like, right. Yes, exactly. And so if we don't have a voice, if those of us who have gone into remission, who are healthy, don't have a voice, then no one has a light. And it's a very dark world. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was something I committed to, because it was so important to me to know that you had been through all of this and you had had your brutal healing experience too, and you were on the other side of it and you had full confidence I could too, that I really vowed, like, okay, when I get through this, I am going to make sure that I do share my story, because I just, back in 2017, 2018, there just weren't many MCAS. I mean, there were many MCAS
No,
stories out there, but there
at
weren't,
all.
certainly weren't MCAS recovery stories out there. And so it's just
No,
like,
because
I'm going to shout it from the
yeah.
rooftops,
Yeah, because I know now, and honestly, a lot of it is thanks to you and the education that you've done publicly, but uh, and some of the conditions that have come out that cause more histamine disorders. Whereas you had a very significant histamine disorder. A lot of the things that I get now, and that was typically what I was seeing 10, 14 years ago, were I would attract the ones from all over the world that were very different because it was so rare. It was so rare, right? And
Yeah.
that's why I could see it in you right away. But now, because so many of the worldly infections that have gone around have spurred up more histamines, and also the microbiome shifts that have spurred up more histamine disorders, they're more secondary.
Mhm.
And although they can present similar, they're not always as hard to get at, and not as, always as uh, don't always have to go with it directly, but you can. But but now it's like you Google histamine and get a ton of stuff. You get all these practitioners and all these things. And when you were dealing with it, that just was not around. That just did not exist. There were a couple cases, they were rare. And then the practitioners who specialized in it, like myself, would see the people go into remission. But those voices were not. Yeah, at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was really wild timing actually, because I kind of considered myself getting into remission around 2019, in the sense that like I really didn't have to worry about histamines anymore. Like I could eat all the high histamine foods. I wasn't reacting to scents, like chemical scents anymore. I could really expand, like I could pretty much live like a normal life day to day at that point. So I was like, all right, I'm in remission. And then like boom, 2020, like right after that. And so I felt like it was almost like divine timing, where it's like, okay, like now's my chance to shine. Like I just went through it. Like, yeah.
Yes. 1000%. 1000%. Like you were sent ahead to learn how to do this so you could teach everyone who is coming. Yeah, because
Yeah.
oh my gosh, are they all coming? Yes. Yeah.
Well, and that leads to, I mean, you're like the queen of POTS and dysautonomia recovery, right? As well, because of your experience.
Yeah.
And so I think, like you were saying, a lot of people who follow me also follow you. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with you, but would you just go into a brief summary of what your chronic illness was like and what your healing journey has been?
Sure. So just briefly, I was healthy. I got an infection in the tropics that went to my nervous system, and then I was very disabled for 12 years with a dysautonomia in POTS. There's mild, medium, and then severe. Mine was very severe. It caused organ damage. I needed a breathing machine. You name it, I probably was diagnosed with it. Lots of neuropathy. And at the time, there wasn't a single case that had gone into remission. It also was very rare then. It took an average of 10 years to get diagnosed because, with the condition being in the nervous system, it's not in the blood. And so the blood tests would miss it. Now, that was until the later stages where you start to get the organ damage. Then it's in the blood too. But I ended up getting out of it after really a grueling period. I mean, going through those kind of illnesses, even today, even with more people diagnosed, it's incredibly isolating and it just destroys you on all levels. It doesn't matter who you are when you come in, you get destroyed. And I do think that's something that we can use, right? And I really tried to do that, especially in my worst years. I really tried to, well, I didn't just try, I did ask. I would continuously ask, what am I meant to learn from this? And I didn't mean the whole picture. I meant that
Mhm.
minute. Like, okay, if I have to get through this minute, what am I supposed to learn from this? There must be some reason to be
Yeah.
going through this. And so when I did finally go into remission, it was so exciting. And my doctors were so excited because they had never seen it. And I was invited to teach at Cleveland Clinic. And I decided instead, I wanted to go live where it was lovely. So I moved out to Oregon where I could be outside year round and naturally be healthy very easily and maintain my health. And went back to school. I ended up opening a practice, but that was honestly, I never thought it would take off. I thought it was going to be a hobby. And then it turned out there was a lot of sick people that found me. So that was, yeah, both lovely and not lovely. I hate that there's people
Mhm.
that need me, but I really loved that, like you, my
Yeah.
experience could go to something very good. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's it, in a very brief nutshell, the, the illness.
Yeah. And, I know that you tried a lot of different nutritional interventions. I know nutrition was a big part of your healing. I definitely want to talk about that mindset stuff too, because I think there were some nuggets there I want to get into. But in terms of the nutritional aspects, you tried a lot of different things and eventually you stumbled on like Weston A. Price and the concept
Yeah,
of an ancestral diet, right?
yeah,
And
correct.
something that I really wanted to get into today was your kind of second wave Weston A. Price exploration you've been on, where you have been trying to like confirm, like, can I corroborate Weston A. Price's findings, basically? And I think this is really important to talk about because so many people have this idea of many indigenous or traditional diets as plant-based regarding like Dan Buettner, Blue Zone type research that's come out. And so I'd love if you could spend a little time like comparing and contrasting what you've found, versus what is commonly shared about these areas.
I would love all of that. That all sounds fabulous. Mhm.
Great. So, yeah, I guess if you could just kind of summarize like
Mhm.
what were your general findings? Like
Got it.
obviously different groups have different diets. It's not like there's one universal human diet. But if you could go through some of the commonalities that you have tended to find with the groups that you visited.
You got it. Okay, so with the diets, I find one of the biggest problems when people look at some of these regions is that they make a lot of assumptions. Many assumptions are that, oh, well, their lifestyle is so good, it wouldn't matter what they eat, these kind of things. And I can tell
Mm,
you from personally being on the ground that the lifestyle is incredibly important and people can heal just from lifestyle. They can heal just from mindset. But what I see ancestrally with these indigenous communities and more traditional communities is that when a food is brought in, even just a couple, you do start to see the weakness in the
mm,
microbiome and things creep in, even if the lifestyle is still the same. So that's not to say that they're not incredibly more healthy than we are, even when that happens. I mean, it's even hard to conceptualize, but it is noticeable. So I do find all of it is important. That's why I always am a fan of that in my own life and anyone else's too. But the when trying to get these Herculean goals of remission, so the yes, or anything else, the across the board, the fats are animal fats in some of the tropical regions for cooking. Okay, so diet wise, it's all primarily animal based. And when I say that, what that means scientifically and in the medical community, it means that, or research, it means that it's over 50% of calories are coming from animal products. So that could be
Wow.
from the
Across
fats,
the
it could
board,
be
these
from the
odds.
protein. Yeah, exactly. So even in the blue zone of Costa Rica, the fat that they use for cooking is a large part of their calories, and that is lard from pork. So they are not plant based. They also do quite a bit of dairy, but it can look that way when you look at a plate. And so that's where a lot of people get thrown off when they go to regions. And one, they don't ask the correct questions, they don't know the history of the region and the history of the colonization. Most of these cultures that I go to, the reason why I'm able to get in is because I don't put a timeline on it. I build relationships and friendships long before I ever ask them anything. And so I can
Mm,
see their worldview. And I also will go in knowing at least what is written about the history of what has happened there. Because
yeah.
most of these regions have been pretty brutalized by the medical community coming in from 17, 1800s and onward, coming in and doing studies. And so they're not very trusting. They've also had a lot of religious persecution, incredible amounts. And so they're afraid to give you real answers. They very often will tell you what you want to hear in terms of
Mm,
that. So unless you get to know them well, you're going to get the wrong feedback. And because a lot of the people who have gone to these regions go for a very short time, they pop in, they pop out, they have their worldview that they're bringing in, and they don't know the language. An enormous amount of miscommunication happens. Couple that with not having a background in medicine or in nutrition or in food history, and they just drop the pot, so to speak. Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's so fascinating that even some of the more like tropical plant heavy diets you were seeing, like still 50% of calories coming from
Yeah,
animal sources. Truly
usually more
remarkable.
so. Yeah, I would say in the
Yeah,
tropics more so, especially the
really.
islands, and then coconuts, seasonal for
Mhm.
coconut. And sometimes they'll make an alcohol, sometimes they'll have a root vegetable like taro, but it is primarily the animal products that they're having, much less of anything else. And really, all the cooking methods across the world are so simple and everything's so
Yeah.
delicious. And it's primarily around the meat, the fish, the animal product. The other things are just kind of like meh in general. So you have some communities that are carnivore, some that absolutely are not, like Costa Rica, but they are all over 50% animal based.
So with your observations, do you have a sense of what you think is most deficient in the Western diet that you think is contributing most to chronic illness, at least on a nutritional level for us?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have so much to say to that. So if I was to put one,
It can be a few. Yeah, it
uh,
doesn't have to be.
okay, I have quite a few. Um, I would say a big one would be our lack of traditional processing of foods. We're eating a lot of foods that are traditional foods, but they're not processed in the right way, which causes extreme nutrient deficiencies and chronic disease that is not identifiable by our modern doctors. I mean, they could if they looked for it, but like say pellagra or some of these berry, they're not testing for that. And you can have
Right.
the deadly form, or you can have the chronic form that later is deadly, but
Yeah.
they don't even rule it out anymore. And it is still very, those things are very much a big thing. In addition
Yes.
to that, with the, let's say you take some of the plant toxins, the solanines, right? Or that's going to go to the nervous system and bog that down. How many nervous system disorders do we have? The lectins damaging the immunity. Traditionally, they were never a problem. They were processed out. Now
Mm,
immunity is a hot mess. So those would be a big one. Another big one would be the lack of proper fats for the cellular membrane. I
mhm.
am dying. I am just waiting on the edge of my chair for people to start talking about the cell membrane in podcasts because it is so important. It's so important. It's essential. And we have the imbalance of our fatty acids, so that phospholipid layer
Mhm.
around the membrane. If that's not right, if it's damaged, if it's deficient, if it's not right, our cells will not communicate. correctly, and everything breaks down from there. So the fats are
Yeah.
a big thing. The lack of light and our
Mm,
posture is massive. I'll tell
yeah.
you the biggest though, I think above all of that, above all of it, is our lack of human connection.
Mm,
We are designed, we are communal animals. We are not lone
yeah.
wolves. We can pretend like we are, we can think that we want to be, but our nervous system, our HRV that now we can measure so well and so easily with all these devices, freaks out when we are by ourselves. It freaks out.
Wow.
We need to be
Yeah.
in a cuddle puddle when we go to sleep. We need to hear people's voices and be around real people, have eye contact and love and familiar faces regularly. So really lacking that in our modern world and everyone being off in their own place and sleeping in their own bedrooms, it's devastating for our health.
Mm,
Devastating because it puts you in sympathetic dominance, which the second you get sympathetic dominant, you're just waiting on a cliff for something to blow you over, right?
right.
Into real illness. And so I think that's probably that and light are the other really big ones.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've actually been talking about connection and attachments a lot more in my programs
Cool.
recently. And I think it's become such a feedback loop. Like, I don't know if you experienced this, but I felt like when I was chronically ill, my vagal tone was so low, like my facial expression just looked like kind of blank and my eyes just looked kind of dull, and it was hard to connect with people. And I think it was hard for people to connect with me, and that just feeds into that loneliness cycle. And so like we have to really go out of our way to like make our expressions really exaggerated and dramatic, and like try to look people in the eye, and touch people even if it feels awkward, and like so much of that gets overlooked in healing.
It really does. And it's so counterintuitive, right? Because any animal, not just us, the second you don't feel good, you go and hide. But when we
Right.
are out of the light and out of physical touch, even when, I don't know about you, when my neuropathy, with the neuropathy, I was in so much pain at all times. I actually couldn't handle touch. Even though I'm a touchy feely person, I couldn't control the amount of pain I was in if I also had another sensation. So
Right.
the touch, all of that can be really hard. But the thing is that we have these amazing studies on the nervous system now. And like one of these I'm going to talk about at the Weston A. Price conference this year. But it makes so much sense, right? All of this stuff is so simple. It actually makes so much sense when you break it down. But when we go and isolate ourselves, right, which we often do out of self-preservation, people don't understand what we're going through. We're in pain. We're sick. We don't feel good. We hide. When we're out of the light, so we are inside, we're not going outside, or if we are, it's under 20 minutes a day, right? Our nervous system registers that as the same level of stress as if we're hiding from an ongoing war around our house, right?
Get
What?
it. Yeah,
What? And ancestrally, it makes sense because when would people be out of the light? But if
totally.
they were hiding,
Right.
right? Yeah, I just think it's absolutely incredible. And so things like that or human touch, they're so counterintuitive when you're sick or when you're depressed, anything,
Yeah.
but they're so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is why I think functional medicine has failed so many people, like exactly what you're talking about, because people want to jump straight to like the parasites, or
Yes.
the or whatever it is, and it's like the foundations are so essential, just the basics of like, are you getting sunlight? Are you touching someone that you trust? Are you getting enough animal fats in your diet? Like those three things that you just highlighted, like sometimes that makes such a bigger difference than whatever anti-parasitic herb you've been given at the doctor.
1,000%. And if you're taking an antiparasitic herb and you're inside, you're not getting light and you're in pain, so you're stressed and your body is stressed, which your body registers different things like being inside as stressed when emotionally you're not. How well is your immune system going to work? You know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Like
think
it's
that's why
that
so
herb.
many struggle.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So it's the order of operations, I feel like, that a lot of clinicians get tripped up with, you know? They want to go in and do these big cleanses and things when they haven't touched on, like, here's the first five foundations that we need to make sure to just help your nervous system see that, like, you're in a place that is safe to
A
recover.
1000%, 1000%. And all of that, honestly, like when when I started looking more into the way light affected the microbiome, and you know, any of us who had elementary school probably remember that we were told that plants photosynthesize and we don't, right? Well, our
Uh-huh.
bacteria do, and that's the bulk of our body, right? And that's
Yeah.
how they communicate. And that's how, between light and vibration, that's how they communicate. Now, think
Hmm.
about someone who's ill. All right, maybe they started with an infection like me or like a Lyme.
Hmm.
Now they're likely going to test positive for a whole host of things, CMV, EBV, all these
Right.
things. And so if they go to a general practitioner or someone, either they'll get written off or given all these anti protocols. All right, take this to
Yeah.
kill this, take this. But if you're not strong enough to fight off those infections on your own, you're not going to be able to use those herbs or protocols and actually get to the other
Yeah.
side. So yeah, the because your bacteria are now at a vibration and sending light in a broken way, and so because of this, until that is fixed, the rabbit wheel of treat sick, treat sick,
Hmm.
treat sick is just unending, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's why it's so important to get strong first and then address those. And the order is always different depending on where someone is when they come in, and yeah, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I am curious if you could also speak a little bit to your observations, because I see this really common myth being perpetuated. It's the brutish and short myth, right? That lives in a tribal culture were just like brutish and short, you
Yeah.
know, like this idea that, like, oh, our
Yes.
ancestors only lived to the age of 30, you know, and it's only been when we've had access to Western medicine and technology that now we have these extended lifespans. And from my own reading, you know, and looking into the topic, that doesn't seem to be the case, but like you've actually been to some of these places. And so I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your observations on this concept.
I'm so glad you asked this because I try to speak about the indigenous communities as much as possible, but you're right. I'm sure the listeners are imagining what we've told, that they're sick and desperate and in need of help, and what a miserable life that is. They die young, they're sick, dying in childbirth, all these things. And that is our world without medicine. That is not their world. Their world doesn't even require medicine aside from a
Yeah.
snake bite, right? So an accident. Outside of that, they don't have anything. It's literally our utopia, and I don't know how to explain it without people seeing it. So one day I will be cutting up the footage. It's part of why I moved back to the States, so I would have time to do so. But
Yeah.
the uh, the imprint of their beautiful health, the only time I see anything even close to that in our view of the world is amongst someone who's gone into remission and is in that bliss state, you know, after
Mm,
healing from something really awful, because
interesting.
the level of contentment and evenness is pretty much the same. And in the
Wow.
indigenous, the incredible mental health is just so beautiful. It's so beautiful to see groups of humans in bliss and satisfaction and joy and lighthearted, but can also be utterly aware of their surroundings and flip to doing and doing important things, but then back to joy, and then falling asleep easily, and then waking up rested, uh, and not getting infections, even though, take Ethiopia this year, where I was. There was bilharzia, which bilharzia, for those of you who don't know, it's a parasite that often takes 6 months to 2 years to show, and it inhibits your nervous system. It makes you fully disabled, or at least it can. It's awful.
Mm.
There's also African sleeping sickness, a huge pandemic. There was, I think it was yellow fever. I can't remember all of them, but it was a lot that I went into. And as soon as I got out of the cities and into the tribal lands, zero. Nobody's sick, but technically it's still in the water and the soil and everywhere else, but they're not getting sick. I didn't get sick, thank goodness, knock on wood. So uh, it's really beautiful because you see from these groups, one, they not only have life quality, which I don't know about for you. For me, having had illness, that is the only thing I care about. I care about life quality today, not longevity. Personally, for my dad, my family, they better live a long time for me, but that's selfish. So that, yes, definitely. My dog too, Phoenix, you better listen. So but, uh, but, in the tribal lands, when I go there, when they haven't been encroached upon by church, government, school, when they haven't had a change in diet or clothing, no one is donating shoes. My goodness, people, please do not donate shoes and t-shirts. That has a whole
Mm,
trickle down effect we can go into if you want, but probably for a different day. But uh, they not only have quality, they have longevity. They live much longer than us, and they're in great health in their elderly years, which is why they're respected in their elderly years, because they are graceful and fit and stronger than the
mm,
others, and their mind is sharper and they're more wise. So
mm.
it's really kind of what we aspire to be, I would say. And it's very life affirming that that is the norm for humans, and
Yeah.
that is what we can attain as well. And if we don't have that, then we have opportunities for growth and learning,
Yeah.
right? Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, like the health versus, or like maybe we want to call it vitality versus
Mhm.
longevity,
Yes.
I think that's a really important distinction to make that a lot of people overlook when they're having these conversations.
Yes, because I didn't think I'd want I'm becoming a person that I'm not very proud of. I'll be perfectly honest. Because this trip back to the States, for some reason, I am seeing a lot more problems than I have seen in my past trips back. I don't know why
Mm,
now. I know maybe am I a curmudgeon now? I don't know what it is, but I am seeing a lot of illness, and I'm just not seeing people that are well or healthy, and
mm-mm. Hardly
so many
any. Yeah.
medications and a lot of fear from the medical system. The bills have even
Mm.
gotten higher, which I'm like, how they have. Um, so yeah, I do wonder, like, how is it that we can sit here in our very broken bodies and minds and think that we have the brilliance and the way out? Like,
Yeah.
it's a bit of hubris, and
Right.
yeah. And so I think it's really helpful to see the communities that I've seen, because you see what real health is, and it helps you from falling into the illusion of, like, maybe one day a discovery kind of thing. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And, kind of circling back around to that mindset piece and the mentality piece,
Yes.
what you mentioned earlier, um, you really focused on in your recovery, like, what can I learn in this moment? And you also mentioned like you sometimes see people really reach this state of like bliss or peace after they've made some kind of remarkable recovery. Um, and I'm wondering if you can, like, is there anything you want to share about like reflecting back in terms
Yeah.
of, gosh, what did you learn? Or
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
was the purpose? Like, what were you meant to learn, now
Yeah.
looking back?
I feel like I could fill a lot of books with that one. Because
Hmm.
it was such a depth of knowledge, and it's something I rarely share with anyone unless I work with them, because it's not something that usually, if you've been well your whole life, these things are, they'll be misinterpreted. I don't know about you,
Yeah.
Jen. I think it's probably, I have no idea, but I would imagine it's probably very easy from people that don't know me and didn't know me during that time to misinterpret my intentions. Because my actions will be the same as everyone else, but my life was very different. So I have rather wholesome
Mhm.
intentions. I have rather wholesome intentions. And the depth of growth that experience gave me is not one that I anticipated. And I will
Huh.
definitely say to anyone struggling, please don't make the mistake that I did and feel like a failure if you're not getting that, because I didn't get that till year 8 or year 9 of the
Mm.
illness. Yeah, I did not
Yeah.
get that. I fought it and I did not handle it well. And I'm sure I would probably do that again if I didn't know what I know now, because it's a miserable thing to go through. And so you do want to fight that reality. But because it took me from the time I really put concerted effort in figuring it out on my own, because it took me 5 years from that point and lots of different protocols and lots of different things. Um, I really went to mindset first because that was the first thing that I could control when I was bedbound.
Yeah.
And I didn't know of anything else that worked. I was listening to and getting audiobooks of people that had healed from impossible conditions, and they were all from different conditions. They were all just like these random light bulbs that turned on in the world, right? Or flowers that blossomed. And the thing that I could see, the thread that I could see in all of them was their mental approach. And so I was like, well, okay, I'm in bed. I can't move. I can't cook for myself. I can do that. So that's what I
Yeah.
started with. And I really held myself to it. And I had to get broken beyond I mean, I can't tell you how many times I thought I broke and I couldn't get lower. And there was more, and there was more coming. And I hope the listeners don't go through that. But if you do, I hope you glean the benefits, and that is the true freedom of, I don't know about you, Jen, but there's something really beautiful about finding a beautiful life when you're still sick and disabled. Really
Yes.
beautiful, because you just
Yeah.
aren't afraid going forward. You found that
Yes.
beauty when you don't have a reason for it. There's not the
Yes.
logic for it. And so it gives you an incredible freedom once you get out, because the things that may have kept you um, small before or kept you afraid before just don't exist for you
Mhm.
anymore, because you face those. And that is a really beautiful gift. So um, I would say the biggest lesson I took away. Oh, well, there was so many. Okay, I can't say it like that because there's so many, but I'll tell you one that comes to mind. Okay, there's a couple.
Yeah.
Uh, One was finding out my personal shadows were actually my tickets out of the illness. That was awesome. That was
Uh-huh.
awesome, right? We often spend a lot of our childhood, you and I were both young when we got sick. We often spend a lot of our childhoods feeling guilty or bad about who we are, which is so silly when you think
Mhm.
about it. You're children, you're adorable. Like, how cute. If you were your mother now, you'd be like, oh my gosh, let me bake you a pie. But
Right.
yes, but I was always very rebellious, and not in like a bad way, but I was rebellious. And that was actually the exact thing that got me out of the illness, was harnessing that rebelliousness. So seeing
Yes.
these parts of yourself and really falling in love with yourself in a real way, in a genuine
Yeah.
way, in a compassionate way, that was
Yeah.
instrumental. And the other thing was playing games. Illness is so serious and it's so isolating. It feels like it's just like carving out your insides. So I really held it to myself that when I would learn about something that that has potentially helped another person get into remission from anything, I would really bring it in. And a big lesson from these incredible stories from people across the globe in these books was relishing in the present moment, right? Which most of us haven't even felt unless we've been forced into it. And so playing that game was really quite instrumental for myself, I would say. So, yeah, there was just a lot of deep lessons. You spend that much time quiet, not talking to anyone and not moving. And, at the time, I guess I should say I didn't have a cell phone or a TV or a computer in my room.
Right.
So I was just hanging out in
Yeah.
a white room, like not talking to anybody. So you don't really have distraction from the pain and what you're going through. And so playing the games, it brought a bit of lightness into the
Mhm.
world. And gosh, yeah, there's so many. A really big one was thinking about what nature would need to see to understand that I want to be here. That was a really big one. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was a
I
really big
have
one.
been I have been digging into like the concept of pleomorphism a lot
Ooh,
lately, and the concept of like, does your microbiome know that you're alive? And I feel like that's exactly what you're saying in a different way, right? Like, what
completely.
would nature have to know for you to know that
Yeah.
you want to be here? Yeah.
Yes.
How did you communicate that? Like, what do you think was the most powerful thing you did?
Okay. So let's see here. I figured that I kind of I not kind of I did imagine myself as a little plant in the forest that had a lot of bugs on it. Okay, so that's how I
Mhm.
imagined myself. And so I was like, okay, I'm in this soil because I couldn't move, right? And so I was like, I'm in this soil. How do I communicate that I want to grow into that tree? right? And I want to go have that epic life that I had started. Um, and so I was like, well, nothing. Okay, if I stop moving in the forest, fungus will start to grow on me, mushrooms, all sorts of things. So I was like, I have to move. So that's where I started the tiny little exercises that you can do when you're bedbound, right? And I really held myself to doing them and to building them each day. I see a big there's so many places to fall through the cracks with chronic illness and getting better, but a big one is consistency. And so I see a lot of
Mhm.
people who will do like a little bit here and then maybe in a week and then on that day I was really consistent with the time and day and when I increased and all of that. And then I worked on my posture a great deal. So this is long before we knew about the posture studies with serotonin, but I knew that the structure of the body had a big impact on the nervous system. And I couldn't
Mhm.
sit up at the time, but I figured I could get bolsters that would put me in the correct position, or I could lay on my back. So I started laying on
Mm.
my back and then looking up to stimulate dopamine, and I would get the window open so that the light would come down to me before I could get outside. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so I did lots and lots of little things like that, and then as I would start to improve a little bit, and it was so slow, y'all. It was slower than molasses, all right, but it was improvement over time with that consistency and with anytime I learned anything else that could potentially help, I brought that into my routine and did it every single day. And I didn't ask if it was going to help or not, because when you get really humbled to your core to that level, like you have been as well, you stop looking for immediate rewards because you know they're not
Yes.
coming, right? You just stop looking for them. And so you get more of an eagle eye strategy of like, okay, this is good for this reason. So I'm going to implement it and then I will do it every day regardless, kind of thing, just in
Mhm.
case. And so I did a lot of those things. And yeah, and then as I could, I started to get more into the daylight. I really worked on laughter, finding reasons to feel happy and grateful. Like really genuinely the emotion, not the triteness. And um, and then I started thinking about community. So this kind of ties into what we were
Mhm.
talking about earlier, and that is that when you're ill, you lose community, and often as the ill person, most people will feel pretty upset that people aren't coming to visit or aren't compassionate or this or that or that. And and the reality is that I came to terms with was, well, symbolically. I really tried to look at things symbolically in all ways because what else was I going to do with my time? So the
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So the I started to think about it as no, community actually, its role in society, its role in tribes, long before I knew the tribes very well. Uh, its role in mythology is something that you go towards, not something that comes to you. So I was like,
Right.
what can I do to get back into community while I'm bedbound? I was like, well, okay, holding a phone is really hard. So maybe I can write letters. So I started writing letters to my friends and I had like letter dates. So once a week I would do this friend and the next day I would do this friend. And so I started to join in to the community more. And then as I
Yeah.
got healthier, I would do more and more and more. And as I got out of bed and was just housebound, then I started helping a lady once a week with MS go to the bathroom, right? So like whatever I could do, I would do. And that might be all my activity for the day, but and for that 2 weeks, but at least it was something, right?
Yeah.
So really kind of seeing where I could join in. And that
Yeah.
was it was great because it brought me out of the victimhood that everybody falls into. I mean, I don't know how you
Yeah.
don't when you're suffering like that. So um yeah, so I had to kind of trick myself out of those pitfalls of illness and those dark spaces. And I think for my own psychology, I had to go through it. I see a lot of people that don't, and I really would like that for everyone.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
Yes.
And I think that's something that is a really important thing to highlight. Like ultimately we'll never know why some people end up going through so much suffering, and others don't. But I think all we can do is to recognize what life has presented us with,
Yes.
like it is what it is, and we can either, complain and say like, oh, this is horrible, I'm just tired of this, I don't want to fight anymore, I don't want to do this anymore, and we'll probably say that at some point anyway. So we're not
Yes.
gonna say that, but we can fall into that pit and not get
Yeah.
out, or we can decide like, well, this is what life has presented me with. So now what? And just in your story and all the things you were saying, just the examples of like, well, I can do little micro exercises in bed. Like that's what I can do. And just continuing to do that over time. So thanks for
Yeah.
sharing all those details. I think for people really ill out there, it's so important to hear how like little things like that can build up over time.
I don't know if you see this, Jen. In fact, I'd love to know if you see this. I really find that getting into remission from any of the conditions, obviously some are easier and some have lighter cases of a condition, whatnot, but it's really when people are consistent and they are able to get to a place of kind of that bliss state pre-remission. Like for me, it came 3 years
Mhm.
before remission, right? And I see that
Yes.
in a lot of people, often when their
Yeah.
physical health is at the worst, the mindset, something shifts. And
Yeah.
then they're okay if they don't heal, but they still
Yes.
do all the things and
Yeah.
consistently. And oh my gosh, I swear it's the consistency, because that,
Yeah.
of nothing else, if nothing else, it communicates to the nervous system that you are in a time of plenty and safety. Because if you can
Yeah.
do the same thing at the same time every single day, the nervous system is
Yes.
like, oh, we're good. Okay, nothing's wrong here. Right.
Yeah.
But if you're eating at different times and waking at different times, and that is chaos. The nervous system reads that as
Yes.
stress. And as you
Yes.
know, because you're so good with the nervous system, as you know, with the nervous system, if it is balanced, oh, our job is so much easier. And we may
Yeah.
not even
Oh, yeah.
have a job if it's like that's a
Yeah.
great thing. That is a great
Yeah.
thing. And I do think for all of us, if we're here, if nature hasn't extinguished us as of right now, there is a purpose for us and we won't know what it is. But just like with you, popping into remission right before this massive earth wave of MCAS
Yeah.
coming to your door. Or for me, when I spoke at Low Carb USA during the pandemic, uh, it was amazing. It was exactly 10 years that I had been in remission, with POTS you can't stand. And here I
Yeah.
was standing on a stage for something to speak about dysautonomia, which was so rare. And now 70 million people had it. Like I felt that,
Yes.
I felt that. So I think with, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like whenever there are things that could just make us sink with overwhelm, there's often that other side of it, which you don't know is coming. And it certainly wouldn't give you solace when you're in the middle of your suffering. But it
Yeah.
is something, you asked what I was thinking when I was trying to communicate to nature that I wanted to
Yeah.
be here. My brother had said something to me, and he was like, Mary, because we used to go hiking and backpacking all the time when I was healthy before I got sick. And he had me imagine a little plant in the forest. And he was like, Mary, do you think nature would waste any energy on that plant if it didn't need it? And I was like,
Mm,
no, no, I don't. And he was like, do you think that plant knows why it's here? I was like, no, I don't.
wow.
And so I just started imagining myself as that plant. And I'll tell you what, when I was on that stage 10 years later, when there's 70 million people, I sure as hell did feel like, yeah, there was a reason. There's a
Yes.
reason. And I think there's a reason why so many people are going into remission now, right? From these conditions that were so impossible.
Yeah.
Your patients, the people who are reading your book, all of
Yeah.
this, because we need more help. There's no, if we had an army of practitioners that know what you and I know, it's not enough, you know?
Yeah.
And so the more people that go into remission, the more potentially they can impact others and help the ones that want to do the same.
Yes. And I think, like we are going to be an army of wounded
Yeah.
healers, and if that is the purpose, it's really a beautiful one if we can look at it that way. So I'm going to wrap it up on that note. I think that was a really inspiring way to end. So yeah, thank you so much again, Mary. What an amazing conversation. I so appreciate your time here today.
Same, same. I'm gonna have to have you on my channel. Now that I'm settled, I'll set up a recording studio and we'll do
Love that.
it. Great.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.